Council over the period 2023-2024. We did have a session last week for about an hour where we did go through them in some length with committee members. And I'm happy to take any further questions following the training session and the questions that were asked and responses given if there's anything further that's arisen. But just to say, we are seeking approval of the accounts. The audit isn't complete yet and may carry on for a short period of time. When we come to sign off, if there are any adjustments that are material in nature, and materiality is approximately £1 million, so if there's an adjustment that's required that's more than that, then we would reconvene the governance committee to approve the statement of accounts with that adjustment in. If it's less but adjustments are required, then myself and the chair of governance would sign that off. And then the final point being, at Appendix B to the account is a draft letter of representation. This is in draft because we would provide this to Grant Thornton immediately before they sign off the accounts, which basically says that we have made available all information to them to assist them in the production, in the completion of the audit. The estimates that are included, the policies on which it is based are appropriate, and they are, to the best of our knowledge, accurate. So it's just for you to consider whether what is contained within the letter of representation concurs with everything you have seen that has come before Governance Committee over the course of the year. And if you're happy, then that will form the basis of the letter that we finally sign off immediately prior to conclusion of the audit.
Thanks, Louise. Any questions from any members? Councillor Clifford.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to say thank you for the training session that we were given. It's very useful. An awful lot of questions are asked by members at this training. It takes us into a real deep level of what's going on, where if we were to obviously do it at this meeting, this would be a very long meeting when you add that into it. And it, whilst maybe the general public doesn't see the questions that are being asked, they are asked. Assurance is sought by members. It's not just reassurance, it's assurance sought. And I'd just like to say thank you. And I also believe the external auditors are happy with that training, how it's done like that. So if I can just ask the external auditors. Thank you.
So obviously we've not been party to the actual training, but it's really good practice that the officers hold that session for members, and as you say, you know, it's outside of the meeting, so that gives you more flexibility in terms of kind of the time and how long, you know, you've got to ask those questions. So yeah, happy that kind of it take place, and it's, you know, indicative of good practice.
Thanks, Louise. Georgia. Any other questions from members of the committee? Councillor Hayden.
It's not necessarily about that part of the agenda item 6. It's about the annual governance statement. Is that being brought up separately, or can I talk about it now?
The annual governance statement will has been considered already in relation to the statement of accounts presented. There will be a new one done to be presented to you at the beginning of next summer, so early in the cycle next year.
It wasn't about the actual technical contents of it. I find it very interesting, and I think it will be useful for pages 238 to 242, which is all about what is corporate governance and what our structure is. And I think that will be a really useful document to be used in further training sessions for the governance committee. So it was just really as to whether or not you could consider using it either in total or what is practical to use in further sessions for the committee and maybe for wider committee members. Thank you. That was all I wanted to say about it. I wasn't trying to upset the goat.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Any further questions? just one item from me for clarification. Agenda page 152, which is your comprehensive income and expenditure statement. There's a line for COVID, which I would have thought would have been long past by 2022. Is there a particular reason for it? Is it just what's left over?
Yes, the amount on that line is in relation to the Household Support Fund, which started during COVID, but has continued beyond COVID and continues to this day. So I think in future that's no longer recorded as a COVID line, but within communities. It was just that year because it was a continuation. We thought it may stop at some point. For consistency, we recorded it the same, but now it's carried on way beyond the end of COVID. We've recorded it in communities.
Thank you. Any more questions on that particular item? Right, statement of accounts. This item is for decision, and it is to approve the items in items 2.2 to 5 in the meeting papers, to approve the statement of accounts subject to any amendments, and the Director of Finance and myself signed the letter of representation. Can we have a vote on that, please? Oh, sorry, proposer. Thanks. Seconder, thanks. Vote, please. Thank you, everybody. Item 7, update on sundry debts, pages 269 to 272. Oh, nice short one. This item is for feedback and noting. I'll hand over to Alison, Head of Customer Services, to present this item.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide an update to the committee about sundry debts which are owed to the Council and the operational improvements which have been implemented since the function was awarded a limited assurance rating in August 2023. Point 7 in the report outlines the key findings and risks which the audit review identified. These include a lack of awareness about the Fair Collection Charter, the absence of training for services, cases not progressing to the next recovery stage, no proactive engagement with customers, and reports about debts not being provided to services. Over the last 12 months, improvements have been introduced, which include the rollout of a new streamlined recovery stages, which are set out at point 10 within the report. In addition, operational arrangements have been improved by delivering mandatory training on the Fair Collection Charter and delivering sundry debt workshops to the directorate management teams across the Council. Weekly age debt reports are also now shared with directors and heads of service, along with regular briefings with senior management team to highlight any issues with age debts. An update on the Council's age debt position is included in the report at point 12. It's important to note that the level of debt does fluctuate from month to month depending on invoices that have been raised and payments which have been received, but this does demonstrate the improvements have made a difference and show a much improved picture with around £732,000 outstanding less in age debt, which is a reduction of about 33%, when compared to last year. We will, of course, continue to work with services to help with recovery of age debts, along with identifying further improvements to processes. Our next priorities will be to embed the recently adopted payment strategy. We have already started working with services to identify recurring payments and where payment up front should be made to improve recovery of monies owed to the Council. I hope you found this update useful, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Alison. Any questions for Alison from the committee members? No. Sorry, Councillor Clifford.
Thank you, Chair. Not really a question, just a comment. It is very good to see that these age debts are reducing significantly, so that really is a pleasing thing to see. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Clifford. And I think the committee's thanks to the officers for bringing us back on track. Long may it continue. Item 8. sorry, yeah, that item was just for noting, so we'll carry on to item 8. Item annual review of counter fraud policies, pages 273 to 366, and Jackie is going to present this one.
Good afternoon. So the policies that we have are our suite of counter fraud policies, which include the anti-fraud, bribery and corruption statement and policy, the fraud response plan, whistleblowing and the anti-money laundering policy. So members are asked to note these, and we've attached copies at appendices A to D. So we have these policies so we can demonstrate that as a council our arrangements are designed to promote and ensure probity and propriety in the conduct of our business. And it also reinforces the council's commitment to the prevention and detection of fraudulent activity. So internal audit review policies on a regular basis, and our colleagues in legal services undertake a review of the money laundering policy. So these have been reviewed to make sure that they reflect current legislation, best practice, that they represent the organisational structure as it is, and they have the most up-to-date contact details. So there was no significant changes made to the policy, they're just updated to make sure that officers are accessible if needed. To support the policies, we provide training and awareness as well. So we have our mandatory e-learning suite for staff that have access to PCs. For other officers, internal audit actually do some face-to-face training for operational staff, and we're just about to start a new programme of this covering anti-fraud, risk management and whistleblowing. So that will start in January. So that's the updated versions. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Jackie. Any questions for Jackie? Councillor Hayden?
Hey, Jackie, just a general one really about the anti-money laundering policy. When I read through it, there's no procedural thing, and it's just a case of highlighting where the areas are where there will be concerns about how money could be laundered. Do you get any feedback about any money laundering that's ever taken place? How would you know?
Well, we'd only know if it was reported, which is kind of the point I think you're making.
Yeah.
I think in relation to the money laundering, most of the controls relate to the receipt of cash, and we receive very little cash now. Most of the transactions that are undertaken by the council are electronic in nature, and most of them would fall below the threshold for money laundering. The larger value transactions, we fulfil our obligations when, for example, land transfers, which would be a good example where there's a significant amount of money changing hands. There are controls in place within legal services that do the necessary checks where necessary. And in relation to potential for fraud connected to money laundering, that's tied into the controls in relation to authorisation of payments. So we've beefed up the controls. You cannot have the same person placing the request as authorising the request. There are limits in place as well to add to those controls. So it's kind of part of an overall system. So I am not uncomfortable that we don't get reports of money laundering because of the nature of the controls we've got in place. But I do take your point that we don't know whether it's happening or not because we haven't had the...
Just an interest really,
Yeah.
as to how it works through.
Many years ago in the private sector, I did have the training on this when the legislation first came in. That's how old I am. It seemed quite odd, but because a lot of the obligation sits on the people doing the transactions, more of the responsibility has moved towards the banking sector since then, because obviously they're holding the funds in the first place and they have to make checks when they receive them. It still happens, we know it does, but I think that we are probably quite a low risk area in relation to money laundering. I suppose the only risk areas you would look at would be some of the businesses potentially, but we do checks when we take on tenants, so that there are other controls around it that can govern that environment as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Any more questions? Okay. again, this item's for feedback and noting, so we'll move on to the next item. Item 9, review of contract procedure rules, pages 337 to 404, and this item is for decision. Tasneem will be presenting this one, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So the report before you relates to the review of the contract procedure rules, which we've taken, which has been taken into consideration in the head of the actual go-live date of the Procurement Act in February. So the changes proposed to the contract procedure rules are legislative in nature to ensure that we are compliant, by February. So members are referred to Appendix A within their pack, which has all the amendments to the CPRs, and those can be found in blue text with strikeouts to the current CPRs in red. A clean version of the actual CPRs is also found at Appendix B for members. And just in terms of what the aims of the actual Procurement Act are, there are a few that I just want to identify. So it's to support businesses by simplifying the actual process, so that it opens up the actual procurement process for small businesses and social enterprises. The new Procurement Act will actually reduce the routes to market from 6 to 2, which will mean that more businesses are able to bid. Additionally, there will be a requirement, obviously, for achieving value for money, so it's just the thread around that. There will be increased transparency, and you'll see within the report I've mentioned around the fact that there will be a central digital platform which will require the council to upload a number of notices. So currently there is only one notice required to be published, which is the contract award notice. Moving forward, there will be a requirement to publish a number of notices which start at the beginning of the procurement life cycle all the way to the end. So there's more transparency in respect of that. There is also going to be a debarment list which will be held centrally by government, which will exclude suppliers who pose a risk on grounds such as fraud and bribery. And there will be also a focus on a wider sort of public benefits, such as such as environmental and social objectives, and not only on the pricing factor. You'll also note from the report that I've mentioned that there will be an increase in thresholds, so the low value thresholds will actually increase from £25,000 to £30,000 to include the VAT element. I think it's also worth noting for members that we have put in addition to the CPRs some elements which provide further controls. So currently as it stands at paragraph 5.6 of the CPRs, if there were any high value procurements above £100,000, it would require cabinet approval, and in sort of special urgency measures, it would be via executive member decision. And then the second stage in respect of the approval of the contract award would be either by cabinet or in sort of urgency times that it would be EMD. So we're actually putting a control measure in place whereby, yes, you would still require cabinet approval or EMD at the first stage in terms of the weighting and the criteria. However, if you utilise the EMD at the first stage, you would be required to obtain cabinet approval at the second stage. So that's an additional measure that we're putting in place. We also have looked at the waivers, and you'd note that at paragraph 39 of the CPRs, it's proposed that all waivers under £100,000 will now require executive member approval as well. And any waivers which are above £100,000 would now require a cabinet approval. So again, there's more transparency around that. Just in terms of, getting in ready for the Act, so the procurement team have been undertaking training and are on track to be ready for the Procurement Act. We have put in place some external training which should be delivered to all staff in January, end of January and beginning of February. So hopefully we will be in a position to provide that training for all staff members. In terms of the recommendations in the actual report, so there are three in nature. So it's for you to review and approve the amendments to the contract procedure rules, for you to recommend the approval of the contract procedure rules to full council, to be implemented on the same date that the Procurement Act goes live. Now we're hoping that will be at the end of February. We don't know because obviously there has been a delay initially, but it's hopeful that it's going to be February. And the third element is around the support, to basically support the request that Council grants delegated authority for the Director of Governance to update any minor changes to the contract procedure rules if any are identified. So that's the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Taz. Any questions? Take Councillor Beach first.
Thank you, Chair. Very well presented report, Taz. On page 339, under paragraph E, under paragraph F, it states that suppliers perform badly on contracts and don't rectify will be at risk of exclusion from future procurements. What do we have in place that if they are performing badly to get them back on track?
So the Procurement Act identifies that we'll have key performance indicators on there. So there will be obviously measures in place to ensure that we are, we are checking that the actual suppliers are performing at a certain level. So those key performance indicators will be there to sort of have the checks and balances in place.
Okay, Councillor Clifford.
Thanks, Chair. If I could ask you to look at page 369 under definitions. I've been quite a parochial type of a chap. Under council, council means Shrewsbury Borough Council. We've got a line through Chorley there.
My apologies, I will pick that up. And obviously that's the reason why you're going to give that delegation to Chris.
So now we know who to blame.
Apologies. I think it's just worthwhile actually outlining that what we are looking to do is obviously align the contract procedure rules for both councils. So obviously, yeah, I will pick that up. Apologies.
Any more questions from the committee? I mean, judging by the amount of blue and red ink on here, there's obviously been a fair amount of work gone into it. So I think, again, we should thank the officers. Just one question. When the limits are actually amended, who decides that?
Are you referring to the actual low value thresholds that I mentioned? Yes. So that's from central government. So that's actually the Procurement Act. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, in relation to the procurement thresholds sent by government, yes, they are. There are limits as well that we're going to try and align to, that we're looking to review as part of the constitution review that I'm having a look at. Things like the key decision level, so that we can make sure that the contract procedure rules aren't set at a different level to executive decision making levels, so that we can get some consistency, which assists members in understanding, but also particularly officers in understanding who's got to make what decision when we're consistent across the two.
Thank you for that clarification. Any more questions, any more observations, any comments? Nope. Right. This item is for a vote, so can we move on to the recommendations at paragraphs 2 to 4 in the papers? Proposer, please. Anybody you want? Thank you. Show of hands, please. Thank you. Item 10, the Treasury it's easy for me to say, the Treasury Mid-Year Review 2024 to 25, pages 405 to 418 in your papers. This item is for feedback and noting, and we'll hand over to Darryl.
Thank you, Chair. Basically, this report is a report we bring as part of good code of practice for treasury management, which naturally, as we present the report, the outturn report went to last committee, the mid-year review, and naturally do the strategy meeting, which will be next February. And this report is presenting sort of 6 month figures in terms of like the capital programme, any potential borrowing, investments, but also provides background information from our Treasury Advisors link group, and that covers things about the wider picture, what's happening in the market around inflation, interest rates, but also provides their regular updates around where they expect interest rates to go down the line in terms of next 2 years. So naturally, as part of this report, we thought the first element is talking about the capital expenditure financing. So as you can see there, it's got the quarterly monitoring reports, which naturally, hopefully, the committee, a lot of people recognise those numbers, where that's naturally going for the programmes that the Droy Council is undertaking. And then it goes into the next section around the capital finance requirement, and naturally that discusses if any kind of capital programme that hasn't got any capital grants funding, it creates a value that's saying that if we went out to have to pay for that through borrowing, it creates that top level figure saying we would need to borrow X amount to pay for that. And it's normally a gauge of the council's indebtedness. But naturally, I'm happy to report that we are actually under borrowed. We're below that number in terms of the borrowing numbers. And then in terms of the debt, which is in table 3, we have the breakdown of our debt, which is stuff that's below 12 months short-term borrowing, and any debt that's over 12 months long-term borrowing. And as you can see from the outturn report, our longer-term debt has reduced. Naturally, we're paying back those loans. And in the short-term debt, that has increased because we've naturally borrowed more short-term from local authorities to cover capital programme and any other elements there. But that's naturally, we have borrowed more, but we're still under our capital finance requirements. That's a good measure there. And as part of that also, we have these authorised limit and operational boundary, which the council agreed for an authorised limit. We would borrow a maximum amount of 99 million. We're naturally at 87 million, so quite comfortably below that. And then the operational boundary was the amount we would expected to borrow in that year, and actually, which was 90 million, we're at 87 million. So even though we've borrowed more short term, we're still below that operational boundary. So naturally, that recognition we have borrowed more, but still below where we were expecting. So I think that's like a good news story that we're keeping that below the number we were expecting. Investments, naturally, if we have cash funds, sometimes we may lend to local authorities, or we will keep them in our call accounts or money market funds, naturally trying to generate in the maximum amount of interest to make sure we're getting the most out of that cash balances. Because naturally, sometimes our councils like Chorley will get money in advance before going out and payment to capital programmes. So naturally, we want to make sure if it's sat in our accounts, we're using it, putting it in the right accounts to maximise the interest we can get at the moment. And naturally, you can see that breakdown of the average investments. And you can see the average yield has been 4.5%. That's based on the averages there, but you can see that there's quite a few lines that are 5%. The reason why it's 4.5 is because there's one line, the call accounts, it's 2%, that's bringing that average down. If that line wasn't there, the average yield would be more like 5%. So just did that for noting there, because that's the calculating average across all those lines. And then naturally it gives a breakdown in table 5, where that money is sat at the moment, where we do have some money with the DMO, which is the Debt Management Office. That's actually where we send it out to generate interest, and it'll come back to us at a later date. And then we have some money in call-off accounts. And we keep those there because when we do investments, we focus on security, liquidity and yield. And naturally we want to make sure the security there, DMO's, Treasury, those are our accounts, and trying to maximise that yield. So basically we can call on those monies when we can to pay for capital receipts, large expenditure. And then the final summaries is the appendices covers all bits from the link group. But the overall kind of summary of this is we have remained within our prudential indicators. We have adhered to all our county panel limits under the authorised limit or under the operational boundary. We have borrowed a little bit more, but it's still under those limits. I think it's recognised the council that we will be looking to borrow in the future to pay for the capital programme. But naturally, we're waiting for that right time when the interest rates do reduce to a level we can borrow more long-term through the Public Works Loan Board. And naturally, we are under-borrowed. So I think naturally there's nothing surprising from the report. I think it's probably a good news story for Droy Council. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Daryl. Any questions for Daryl? Councillor Beach.
Thanks, Daryl. It's a very good report, thank you. And it's a comment really to note that in the summary that it's all good news that we've remained within our indicators and that we have achieved an increased investment yield. So thank you for that.
Any more questions or observations? Presumably, Appendix D, the interest rate forecast, there's no indication that we're going to go back to what we were in last year, the sort of 0.5% or anything like that.
I think that's probably, like I say, from our advisors, it is speculation there. But when you looked at interest rates going back way before those bits when the Bank of England had 0%, that's an outlier, because naturally years before in the 80s, interest rates were much higher. So I think it's probably, we'd have to see what number it's going to lie to. I think naturally the Bank of England has that rate of 2%, but we need to see what external factors are going to impact it. As you may know, we've had a new budget from the new government, we've had elections in America, which have all have impact on the market. So naturally, we need to see what those ripple effects are. And our advisors will always, these updates come quite regularly to us and give us advice. So hopefully it will reach level, but speculation what level it would go to.
I'm sure the savers will be very pleased to know we're not going back to less than 1%. Right, no more questions? In that case then, that item was feedback and noting. We'll move on to the next item, which is the work programme for the committee, pages 419 to 420. No, 419. The details of the work programme for 2024-25 are there. Any comments, any observations? Well, that one was short and sweet. Item 12, any urgent business previously agreed with the chair? I haven't. Any?
Chair, it's just a brief one on just on the work programme. After the agenda was published, I had a conversation with the Head of Audit and Risk. I think we're going to bring the risk management strategy to a future meeting before the end of this year as well. So it was just an addition to what's on that report there. Thank you.
Sorry about that, it wasn't on my script. Shows how important I am. Right. As no urgent business, and just before we do close, as we will all be aware right now, this is our Director of Finance and Section 151 Officer, Louise's last committee meeting before her retirement next month. Hello. I mean, genuinely, on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for all the work you've done, all the help you've given me and the support you've given the committee, and wish you well in the future. And send us some pictures when you're basking in the sun or whatever it is you're going to be doing. Thank you very much, Louise. Thank you. That concludes the meeting. The next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, the 22nd of January, 2025. Thank you all for your time.